I'm Renee Whitehouse. You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast. In 2013, I traveled to Mexico for the first time as part of my university archaeology course focusing on the Maya in Mesoamerica. Our professor, Dr. Geoffrey Braswell, led us to dozens of sites in southeastern Mexico and northern Guatemala over a 2.5-week period. Every night, a few of us students, 4 or 5 of 9, went out to dinner with our professor and listened to his stories while drinking cervezas and sipping some good tequila. Years later, I was taken back to those enjoyable evenings once I found podcasts. So, as one of my original inspirations, I'm dedicating this episode of Archaeology to Dr. Geoffrey Braswell. Here is The Resurrection of Pakal. Perched up against the wall inside the lobby of Hotel Xibalba in Chiapas, Mexico, is a replica of the coffin lid of Pakal the Great. His full name translates to Radiant Cornflower Shield and is rendered in classic Mayan as Baikala, who is known as the Ahau or King of Palenque in the late classic period. Before his name was securely deciphered from Mayan inscriptions, Pakal had been known by various nicknames and approximations, including Sun Shield and 8 Ahau. He is additionally thought by some archaeologists to also be the king referred to as Casper, because the name glyphs are too broken to read, so whoever it was is known as a friendly ghost. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to identify him as Pakal. Born in March 603 CE, 989130 on the Mesoamerican long count calendar, Pakal took over the throne when he was old enough, at age 12, on the 27th of July, 1615, 99248, from his mother, Lady Sak, which means White Quetzal. She was the Ahau before him instead of his father, Kaan Mohish, because he was only a nobleman in the state of Palenque, while she was the direct heir of her father, Pakal, who was also Ahau. Lady Sak has her own extensive story as a highly influential ruler of great importance in Mayan history and is depicted on the coffin lid of her son, and she only ruled for 4 years. Pakal was 80 years old when he died on 9/12/11/518 or August 683 and reigned for 68 years and 33 days. Because he had such a long reign, he did accomplish a great deal and became known as Pakal the Great, which I'm only going to summarize a few highlights here just to get a little background. During the Classic period, which dates from circa 200 to 910 CE, the number of Mayan cities grew very quickly. There were as many as 60 in the 8th century, and they would fight regularly, especially between the city-states of Tikal and Calakmul. Palenque was in the midst of a particularly turbulent time in its history. 4 years before Pakal was born, Palenque had been sacked by Calakmul, which lies only 239 kilometers, or about 148.5 miles away. During Pakal's early childhood, another catastrophic attack was led by Calakmul's Ahau, Scroll Serpent, in 611. The following year, when Pakal was 8 or 9 years old, the deaths of both the ruling Palenque Ahau, Ahen Yolmatz, and his heir, Pakal, so Pakal's maternal grandfather and namesake, triggered a crisis of succession, and only about 4 years later, Pakal became Ahau of the kingdom of Pakal with a B within the city-state of Palenque, which is also the namesake of this site. During his time as Ahau, Pakal increased Palenque's influence in the Western Mayan nations and launched a building program at his capital that resulted in some of the finest Maya art and architecture. In March 626, on 9/9/1307, he married Ishtitakbu Ahau, a descendant from the former ruling Toktan dynasty from Palenque's satellite settlement Ishtekuk'a During their long marriage, they had at least 2 sons, Kanbalang II, born in 635, Kaan Hoi Chitam, born in 644, and probably a third, Tiwul Chanmat, born in 1648. Piedra Negras captured one of Pakal's officials, A Kaahun, in 1628. 6 days later, Noon Yul Chak, a How of Saint Elena, as it is now called, was apprehended and brought to Palenque. So, Saint Elena became a tributary of Palenque. In 659, Pakal apprehends 6 convicts, one of which, called Ahin Chak Ak, came from Pipat, also known as Pomona. In 663, Pakal killed a leader from Pipa and captured 6 Elena people. So long story short, there was a lot of capturing and recapturing of Mayan people and trying to get ahead. There was a lot of competition between the Maya cities. Switching over to monumental projects, in 647, at the age of 44, the year before his 3rd son would have been born, Pakal began his first construction project, a temple now known as El Olvidado, or the Forgotten in Spanish, due to its remoteness from Lacamha. The Palenque Palace is one of Pakal's most successful construction projects. The base structure was already in place, but Pakal substantially expanded it by adding memorial rooms to the existing level. He next built Building E, known as White Skin House, Sak Nuk Na in classic Maya, because of its white paint rather than the red used elsewhere in the palace. Pakal's monuments and texts included the oval palace tablet, hieroglyphic stairway, house C writings, subterranean thrones and tabaroids, olvidado piers, and sarcophagus texts. In November 672, on 9/12/0618, tragedy struck when Pakal's 47-year-old wife, Akbu Ahau, passed away. Pakal also presided over the funeral of Tiwul Chanmat, his 3rd son, 8 years later. In the final years of his long life, Pakal created the Temple of Inscriptions as a burial monument to himself. According to a date documented in the stucco sculpture of the piers, the structure started construction before 678 CE, possibly as early as 675 CE, and was dedicated on July 6, 690, 7 years after Pakal's death. If the dates of the Temple of Inscriptions are true, Pakal died 5.5 years into the construction process, around halfway through. Kanich Khan Balam II, Pakal's son and successor, would spend an additional 5 years completing the temple's construction and adornment. While there is evidence of haste in the final carving of the coffin deep within the temple, this evidence cannot be observed on the outside design. This suggests that Kanbalam II had the tomb decoration rapidly done following his father's death before sealing the tomb and then finishing the rest of the tomb decoration at a much slower and more deliberate pace. Pakal's coffin, complete with his remains, are still buried beneath the Temple of Inscriptions. The coffin itself has dimensions of approximately 4.5 meters long, 3.6 to 4.2 meters high, and about 2 meters wide. So for the imperial measurements, 15 meters long, 12 to 14 meters high, and about 7 feet wide. For this episode, we'll mostly just be focusing on the lid and the story of Pakal being resurrected into Xibalba, the spirit world. Although we won't be focusing on the other surfaces in the tomb, or on the pyramid face, or the other monumental groups in this article, it is valuable to know that much of the knowledge that we have is based on the inscriptions on the Temple of Inscriptions and in Pakal's tomb, which archaeologists and linguists translated. This just means that the known history could be colored to support Pakal and his family being in power, but not saying that it's wrong. There are name glyphs next to the seated kings carved around the outside of the entire coffin. These are Pakal's ancestors and Palenque's previous kings, which is a method of proving Pakal's right to rule even after his death. Further, using these depictions, we can identify the kings in the Temples of the Cross group built by Khan Blombil II in the 690s. This is because he followed the stylistic aspects that he and Pakal developed as they supposedly worked on Pakal's funerary structures together. Before getting into what archaeologists, anthropologists, and ethnographers think the symbolism behind the coffin lid really means, there is a notion of aliens that needs to be addressed. As an archaeologist who studied the region, if even for a short time, and just generally believes that ancient people are way smarter than we give them credit for, it is so clear that Pakal is not being carried up into outer space. And I think that ideas like this are hurting the discourse of taking mythological symbolism seriously as allegory. These myths were intrinsic to whomever could see it, and most assuredly to Pakal and his family. Whether it was to make Pakal feel better as he reached the end of his life, or more likely to keep family in power with a deified ancestor. Working our way from the outside in, the coffin lid's carving has a framing like many other works of art, and this one is filled with symbols and glyphs. The top and the bottom are mirror images of each other with three faces in profile peering through the quatrefoils. These are portals between our world and the underworld, Xibalba. Each are individually called a hole, H-O-L, and look like four-leaf clovers. Next to each clover are glyphs naming the faces as Sebal, secondary lords who are looking from our world to the other. And since the human desire to be remembered never changes, archaeologists think that these are also the signatures of the main architect, the artist, and the scribe who worked on the pyramid and on the burial chamber, which included this coffin. In the middle of the lengths of the border frame is the sun in the east on the right side where it rises, and the moon in the west on the left where the sun sets, which is often the direction to the spirit realm or the underworld. The moon is depicted as a rabbit coming out of a cave, the doorway to Xibalba, because the Maya traditionally told the story of the rabbit in the moon, similar to various Asian cultures, and symbolically just like European traditions that talk about seeing the man in the moon. Around the rest of the frame and in the negative space within the inner composition are common Mayan astrological symbols, shells, stars, and jade bones, signifying that the entire scene is being framed by the cosmos. Looking inward, the eye is first drawn to the lower center, where Pakal, who passed away at a ripe old age, is shown as a young man sitting in a fetal position as if he were being born from the world tree as it rises from the bony jaws of the earth monster's mouth. The four-part monster on which Pakal is resting has the base bone jaw with the beard underneath its eyes, ear florets, and a ceramic plate holding up three objects of great significance to the Mayan people. Moving from left to right, the first is a seashell signifying the watery underworld. The second, the middle symbol, is a rounded version of a stingray spine. In the ancient Maya tradition, kings and queens would sacrifice a piece of themselves to the gods. In this case, it would be through bloodletting. For men, it involved piercing the foreskin of the penis with the stingray spine, and for women, it was through use of a rope of thorns being flossed through their tongues, which was first pierced by a stingray spine. In either case, the blood would be caught on paper strips and then burned so the blood in the smoke could be carried up to the gods. And the symbol on the right, the circle with the glyph that looks like a % sign, means death, with a piece of corn or maize growing out sideways from the circle. Altogether, this means that Pakal's human body was an offering of blood from the underworld and that he is revealing himself to be the maize god. Pakal is depicted in this way to show that he should be considered a deity, in particular the young maize god, or as a combination of the hero twins. Pakal is dressed in a skirt, bracelet, and anklets, all made from jade beads. None of this is actually typically masculine wear, even for the time. The purpose of this clothing is to represent the feminine aspects. as one incarnation of the hero twins mythos is one male and one female, much like Artemis and Apollo, and the maize god as a paramount god must embody characteristics from both traditionally recognized genetically prescribed human sexes. Pakal is also wearing a cracked turtle shell on his bead necklace, harkening back to the creation myth when the world tree first grew out of the shell, a nose piercing, and an elongated headdress. The headdress, a common motif in Mesoamerican stela and a recognizable piece of warrior armor, is not a sign of godliness in itself, but is a sign of sacrifice and god worship. It contains a symbol of Ku'il, the smoking axe, which represents kingship and the god of same. On the back base of the crown are two strands of beads with what could be short feathers hanging down under what also could be the long feathers of the quetzal bird, which the Mayan bred and raised in pens in multiple cities as highly prized status symbols. Following Pakal's eye line, we look upward towards the cross shape behind him, Wakakchan, or Yash Imishche, the world tree, the green tree, or the first tree. This giant ceiba tree, Ceiba pentandra, also known as kepak or a silk cotton tree, has held up the heavens since the hero twins won the ballgame at the beginning of creation. Draped over the branches is a two-headed snake. Each head symbolizes kingship, with Ku'il on the left and Sabunal, the jester god, on the right. According to Dr. Braswell, in 2013, the tree itself is personified, depicted with two eyes and a nose, but I couldn't really see them. But it is definitely covered in other heavenly symbols. One of these symbols is Yash, meaning green of the green, which symbolizes the spiky cross-like form of the ceiba tree. The tree is also growing three serpentine-like heads, one out of each of the branches, complete with the fuzzy maize tassels as headdresses, as a means of connecting the story of the world tree to the birth and death of maize. This is another way that Pakal is performing deity imitation. The last piece of iconography is the otherworldly bird sitting on the top branch. The bird itself, Itsamye, is a symbol of, or the bird form stand-in for, the creation god / creator sorcerer Itsamna, who is forever watching over our creation. Ultimately, this carving shows the deceased Pakal as an offering resurrected from Xibalba, the underworld. He is presenting himself as the young maize god who was one of, if not the most important character in the creation myth, depending on which version you're going with, and definitely in the story of maize. As the hero of humanity, he is the gift, bolstered by the world tree behind him and holding him as well as other symbols of the heavens and kingship with the representation and the approval of a premier god of creation. This scene is therefore not only one of death, but one of resurrection, displaying the divine nature of the king as the young maize god, and thus the constant cycle that follows the natural world. This work of art can be seen in dozens of places, hundreds if you include the internet, including Hotel Xibalba, Palenque's local site museum, and the National Museum in Mexico City. These are all copies though, and the only place to visit the original is still within the Temple of Inscriptions, deep in the rainforest of Chiapas, Mexico, where the mouth of the cave waits for the rabbit of the moon. Cheesy, I know. Just as asides, the long count calendar identifies a date by counting the number of days from a starting date, which is generally calculated to be August 11th, 3114 BCE in the proleptic Georgian calendar, or September 6th in the Julian calendar. There has been much debate over the precise correlation between the Western calendars and the long count calendars. The August 11th date is based on the Goodman-Martinez-Thompson GMT correlation. As a little bit more background, the Mesoamerican long count calendar is a non-repeating base 20 and base 18 calendar used by several pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures, but most notably by the Maya. For this reason, it is often known as the Maya long count calendar. The two most widely used calendars in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica were the 260-day Tzolk'in and the 365-day Hab. The combination of the Hab and Tzolk'in identifies the day in a combination which does not occur again for another 18,980 days. 52 Hab cycles of 65 days equals 73 Tzolk'in cycles of 260 days, approximately 52 years, a period known as the calendar round. Also, the word Xibalba could be found in classical Ch'olti, the oldest known member of the Mayan language family. It is the primary language known in pre-Columbian inscriptions from the Maya civilization's classic period. The classic period is also around the time that a lot of the sub-languages within Mayan started to diverge. It is also the shared ancestor of the Cholan branch of the Maya language family. Contemporary descendants of classic Maya include Ch'ol and Ch'orti. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to another episode of my podcast, or if this is your first, welcome! Glad to have you listening. I would like to apologize for my butchering of other languages. I am very much trying to get the names right, but I make mistakes. Once again, thank you for your patience. If you have any corrections, extra information, or any questions, please don't hesitate to email me at detoursinarchaeology@gmail.com or head over to my website at detoursinarchaeology.com and say hi. I like it when people say hi. If you want to follow along and look at a lot of pictures while going through the podcast, click the link in the description. It'll take you to the written version of this with lots of pictures and all the citations that I used while doing my research. Most of the actual story and the interpretation is from my professor, Dr. Braswell. While we were in Mexico, I took very extensive notes on everything he said because I found it so fascinating. Under the citations, there are also sources for further readings, which I do recommend because they are pretty cool. All the music comes from Scott Buckley at scottbuckley.com.au. Once again, I'm glad you could join me on this captivating journey through the art and symbolism of ancient cultures. If you enjoyed today's episode, and if you'd like to stay up to date on my latest content, make sure to subscribe to my podcast. I love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so please leave a comment or review or just like it. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue sharing these incredible stories. For more fascinating art history insights, please visit my website and don't forget to follow me on social media for all the latest updates. You'll get to see my articles and also my pieces of art. So stay curious and stay inspired. And until next time, keep taking those detours. Thanks again.